What? A 4K mini LED monitor that might actually be even better than the 32M2V? Can it be true? And will my eyes ever recover from staring into the sun? Well, let's find out by gripping this thing with the force of God and going to town with the old testing tools. But first, what are the specs? Well, I'm glad you asked. The INNOCN 27M2V we're reviewing today is a 3840 by 2160 160Hz 27-inch 16:9 mini LED monitor with 1,152 local dimming zones, a PPI of 163, a 1 millisecond response time. Yes, it's G-Sync and FreeSync compatible, and it has an HDR 1000 rating. But what about the stand? Well, it's actually fantastic, doing everything you would expect it to do. In terms of ports, you're getting two HDMI 2.1 ports, meaning yes, you can hook it up to your PC and a next generation console and take full advantage of that. It also has DisplayPort 1.4, a 90-watt USB-C, two USB-A 3.0s, one USB-B, and a 3.5mm audio jack. And of course, it is also VESA mount compatible. So all those specs are looking mighty fine, fellas. And at a price of just $799.99 on Amazon, which, yes, that is expensive for a monitor, but when compared to the other stuff it's competing with, such as the PG32 UQX, which is over $3,000, it's starting to look like one hell of a deal. And if you're interested, please be sure to go check it out through my Amazon affiliate link in the description below. But does it actually hold up when we get out the torture tools? Let's find out by starting off with the color. And starting off first with the SDR performance, we can see here that it is actually capable of getting fairly accurate once you go ahead and mess around in the settings, which if you do want all my settings in ICC profiles, as always, not only for this, but all the monitors that I review, it will be linked in my Patreon in the description below. But as you can see here, I was able to get 6587K with a delta E of just 0.8, so pretty good there. In terms of the actual gamut coverage, we've got 99.7% sRGB, 93.6% Adobe RGB, and 96.1% DCI-P3. In terms of the volume, 164.1% sRGB, 113.1% Adobe RGB, and 116.2% DCI-P3, so very good in SDR. What about HDR? Not quite as good. You really can't make a whole lot of adjustments, so I was able to get 6823K with a delta E of 2.9. So I don't think you'd want to use the HDR mode if you're going to be doing some editing. And just to further prove that, in terms of coverage, we're talking 98.4% sRGB, 74.1% Adobe RGB, and 78% DCI-P3. And in terms of volume, 110.2% sRGB, 75.9% Adobe RGB, and 78.1% DCI-P3. So definitely a lot worse than its SDR. But of course, HDR does give you that nice punch right in the nuts and also a great picture for gaming. And speaking of HDR punch, what about the brightness? Well, in the 10% window, it is actually very impressive, bringing 1033 nits, showing that yes, this thing definitely deserves its HDR 1000 rating and actually puts it as the third brightest monitor in this test, beating out many other mini LED monitors. But what about 100% window? Here's where things get shocking, guys. It's actually the brightest monitor I've tested so far in a 100% window. Now, do keep in mind, this is kind of like just for a few seconds it reaches over 1200 nits, and as time goes on, it will slowly dim closer to 600 nits, but it is capable of giving you some very, very bright highlights. So very impressive stuff there, beating out even the PG32 UQX, which, keep in mind, once again, that thing's over $3,000. and this one's about 800, so big difference. But what about games? Well, Battlefield 1 HDR here you can see yet again is doing very well, getting 1143 nits for its peak brightness, just behind the PG32 UQX, and the second best result I've recorded thus far. But what about the minimum brightness? Well, here I wasn't as impressed. It got 0.08 nits. And in terms of a contrast ratio, when taking into account the brightness, it is giving you a contrast ratio of 6,225 to 1. But now we got to talk about the 160 Hz mode and the latency, because unfortunately, guys, with an NVIDIA GPU, you actually can't get 160 Hz working out of the box. Now, you can overclock it. I got up to 154 Hz, so not a big deal there, but I would like to see them fix this in a future firmware update. And at 154 Hz, I was able to get 33.8 milliseconds of total system latency, putting it in the faster half of all my results. Now, in terms of power draw, it draws up to 130 watts, so it does draw a lot of power, but it is less than the 32M2V, which I think it is kind of in direct competition with. But what about its motion performance? And here I was absolutely shocked, guys, because it actually blows away the 32M2V and PG32UQX, which kind of are its competitors in that 27 to 32 inch range. And as you can see here in the normal mode, it looks pretty dang clear. Of course, there's a little bit of blurring, but not much ghosting at all. On fast, you can see here it does start to get a little bit of inverse ghosting on the brighter scenes, and then ultra fast I would definitely stay away from, as it does give you a lot of inverse ghosting. But if you compare it to something like the OLED G8, yes, the OLED G8 is a little bit cleaner, but for this being an LCD based technology, even though it is mini LED, this is some very, very impressive results to be seeing out of a mini LED monitor. So if you're someone who's looking for something that not only looks great, but also performs very well, yes, this is very, very good here, guys. Now, in terms of the finish, unfortunately, it is using a hideous semi-matte filter. Now, I've definitely seen worse semi-matte finishes and way worse matte finishes, but I would love to see this monitor with a glossy finish. I think it would greatly benefit from a premium glossy design, and it would allow it to have better contrast ratios, better brightness, and of course you will get much better picture clarity as well. But in terms of the viewing angles, since it is a mini LED, it's not fantastic, but I've seen worse, so do keep in mind it's probably not the best monitor for being like playing at a 45-degree angle or something. You should try and get in front of it, or you will start to see more blooming from that mini LED backlight. But in terms of uniformity, overall I thought it was pretty good. It is an LCD based technology, so there can be some imperfections, but overall nothing super bad. But did I notice any issues with the display? And unfortunately, yes, I did. Sometimes when I would turn my computer on for the first time, it would either just not turn on, or you might get a few HDR issues, making it so that you kind of have to like turn the display on and off for Windows to properly see it. So that is kind of an issue, but mine also had 4 dead pixels, so there is a possibility I could have gotten a bad model, but do keep in mind you might have an issue with it kind of trying to wake up. But also, one other issue I noticed that was very bizarre is it had somewhat of, I don't want to call it burn-in, but when I was running the UFO test for a really long time and I exited out, I could see trails of it still on the display until I turned it off and then turned it back on after a couple of minutes, and then it was completely gone. So it would be strange if it was like burn-in, so I'm not sure what's going on, and I couldn't replicate it with any other thing that I put on the screen. It was only the UFO test that caused that to happen. So I'm not sure what's going on, but keep that in mind if you are going to be purchasing this display, that there is a possibility that you might not want to run the UFO test for hours on end. But what do I think overall about this display? Should you purchase it? And honestly, despite a few of the issues that I had, I do think this is an absolutely fantastic 4K monitor. Now, I know a lot of people want 32 inches, but personally, I really don't care too much about the size. And I think 27 inches is big enough to appreciate 4K, and you get an absolutely fantastic picture out of this, and HDR is very bright and very punchy. And not only that, but you're also getting a very fast display as well, which honestly, guys, I think this display is actually going to now take the crown over the 32M2V as my #1 best 4K HDR monitor on the market, and I do highly suggest you take a look at it, especially considering that it's much, much cheaper than really all the other alternatives out there. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, RuPro has you covered with their RuPro 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes ranging from 3 to 165 feet, and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K at 60 FPS or 4K at 120 FPS HDR10 video through its ultra-thin, flexible, and durable housing, and it even supports eARC. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out RuPro on Amazon today.